Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk about the season 1 finale of Star Trek Prodigy. It was called Supernova Part 2. And it picks up right where we left off at the end of Part 1. And we see the crew realizing that if they proto-jump and simultaneously explode the protostar inside the ship and thereby the protostar, the ship itself, they can kill the construct as they escape on a shuttlecraft that they build in the craft building bay on the ship, but they have to leave Janeway the hologram behind in order to detonate it. And though she says that she could be copied onto an isolinear chip and taken with them, she's actually unable to do it, but she doesn't tell the crew that. And then she explodes the protostar as it's jumping in a pretty emotional scene. The shuttlecraft that the crew builds is a minimal shuttlecraft. It's very small. It's missing even navigation systems so that it could be, I guess, efficient or whatever. And there are no seats or anything. They barely fit in it. They're sitting in it cramped as if they're stowaways in a small cargo hold on a ship as it floats away from the protostar as it warps off and self-destructs. And it was just a really emotional sort of scene, the way they set it up and depicted it. And they even show the crew like holding hands, and you can tell that they're very emotional as it's happening. Immediately after this, in the absence of the ship, the signal is no longer menacing the fleet, and Admiral Janeway orders a search for the crew of the protostar in case they abandoned it before it went missing. They don't necessarily know that it's destroyed. When the crew, still on the shuttlecraft, tries to activate the copied Janeway hologram, they find out that it's not there and that in its place is a pre-recorded message from the hologram in which Janeway explains that she couldn't go with them. And the stuff that she says to them is very poignant and very moving. And again, it's a moving moment where they realize that she's gone. 1 month later, at Starfleet Academy, a science officer explains to Janeway that the explosion left a rift, and they discover that it goes to the same space-time coordinates which Chakotay went to in the future when the protostar originally passed through an anomaly. Then the shuttlecraft arrives in San Francisco, and the crew is put on trial with Janeway as their advocate, seeking the dropping of all charges and their admission to the Academy, including Dahl, who she points out is an augment, yes, but he's made up of many of the Federation's own species, and that he basically represents the best of the Federation. It was a really well-written speech that she gives, and it was a really great scene, and I thought it comported with Star Trek of the past. It was very Star Trek, and it was very Janeway, and Kate Mulgrew did an excellent job. The charges do in fact get dropped, but the crew doesn't get into Starfleet Academy because, as Janeway herself explains it, the council decided that it wouldn't be fair to put non-Federation citizens who've never, taken any of the entrance exams or anything like that into the Academy ahead of other people who've been waiting. And I thought that that was a fair result. But she explains that she has been able to get 5 of them assigned to a ship of her choosing as basically interns of a sort, if not, cadets. But Gwyn, the 6th member of the crew, goes off to her homeworld to try to ensure that when first contact eventually happens, her world doesn't, in fact, tear itself apart and destroy itself, as it did originally, causing Jacob to dub her the Unifier. But before she leaves, she has a goodbye scene with Dahl, which again was very well done. I found it to be very moving, and they share a little smooch. And, it comes down to the little details. There's a moment where, they're sitting very close to each other and kind of leaning on each other, and you can tell that they care about each other from their body language and, as well as the things they're saying. And, before she kisses him, she crosses one of her fingers on top of his. Like, she doesn't take and hold his hand like completely. It's a very subtle thing where she intertwines one of her fingers into his fingers, and they did a close up on it. And there's no spoken word there. She doesn't say, I want to hold your hand or anything like that. It's just a movement, and they did a close up on it. And it was just, it said so much, I think, to me about the love between these two characters. And then there was a subtle smooch, and even their eyes. I mean, for animation, you have to keep in mind actors, live actors can do things with their eyes, and it's, sort of instinctive. But this is being drawn by someone, and to carry that instinct of, what your eyes would be doing in such a scene over to a work that's that they're drawing with their hand as opposed to acting out in real time themselves, is just a really strong sign of someone who understands the human condition. And it comes across even in their eye, their eye placement, the way that the characters are looking at each other in this scene. It was just very powerful. Before the episode ends, we discover that Zero gets a new exoskeleton and is looking very spiffy, and that Starfleet has commissioned a whole new protostar class of ships based on the protostar prototype. But it seems like that's not the ship class that Janeway is taking the crew to, because she says she has something bigger in mind for them. And that's where the episode and thus the season ended. I enjoyed this episode quite a bit. I didn't find it to be as powerful an episode as last week, but it was very good Star Trek. It had a lot of poignant moments and moving moments and endearing moments. It had a lot of heart. So I thought it was very, very good. I thought it moved along a little too fast, given all the buildup we've had all season, and then they suddenly go, "Hey, let's blow it up," and they don't labor over it. It takes like 2 seconds, and then it's over. The crisis, and then we immediately jump to a month later, and there's one scene where Janeway makes an impassioned speech, and then the charges are dropped, and they move on to a new, future, a new scenario for season 2. So it was a little fast. They wrapped it up a little quickly, but I don't think it was so quickly that it was something that made the episode bad or that made the season bad. I think, it's a half-hour show, it's a kids show, and last week was really the sort of climax of the season, and this week was just the come down and the resolution. And so it might have seemed to resolve everything quickly, but they really kind of brought it to the climax at the end of last week. And if they had run this as an hour-long episode, I don't think it would have seemed as fast. It's just that they split it up, so you kind of get that feeling that it went a little fast in the end. But I don't think it went so fast that it was unrealistic or implausible. I think it I think it made sense the way they did it. It seemed a little fast. I don't know that it was necessarily too fast, if that makes any sense whatsoever. But it wrapped up the plot points and arcs that had been set up across the season, and it started some new ones, which is good. What's Gwyn gonna do? Are we gonna see Gwyn in season 2? I hope we do. She's my favorite character, and I really hope she's not off the show. Kate Mulgrew was amazing. I have a whole new respect for Janeway. I mean, I always liked Janeway. I never had any dislike of Janeway, but wow, did this character get a lot of great moments in this short season. I mean, compared to the entire run of Voyager. And did Kate Mulgrew knock it out of the park? I mean, that's an understatement. The whole cast was fantastic. So I really enjoyed this finale. I really enjoyed this season. I really enjoyed this show. If you go back and look at my individual reviews, you'll see where 3 or 4 of the episodes, I thought they were, but the rest of the season was great. I thought this was a great wrap up, and I'm looking forward to season 2. One thing I want to address before I go is that it's pointed out in this episode when Gwyn and Dal are saying goodbye that her father, the diviner, in this time period hasn't yet gone back in time and died. So he's, of course, still alive, meaning that during season 1, he was in 2 places at once. His future self was in the present, and his present self was in the present. Now there's only one self. But anyway, he's still alive, which gives Gwyn the opportunity to meet him at a point in time before she's actually created, depending on when she was created, which is interesting because if she and he or whatever prevent what happened on their home world after first contact, then he might not create her to begin with. Although I suppose he could still choose to, but his creation of her had to do with his plan to save his homeworld, which didn't occur until after it tore itself apart. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that. Or will she find him already having come back in time, but not yet dead, at a point in time when she already exists and encounter herself? It'll be weird. It depends on how the timeline is. I'm trying to imagine precisely how they'll involve her in season 2 if she's in a completely separate location. But I suppose it's not anything they didn't do in season 1 when they would bounce back and forth from the protostar after it left the prison planet to the diviner wherever he was to the dauntless, etc. So I suppose they could do it. So here's hoping, because again, favorite character. Anyway, that's my review of this episode. I thought it was great. I enjoyed the season of the show. I'm very much looking forward to season 2. And if you haven't checked it out, at all, you need to check it out. So I'm going to get out of here for now. I'll be back with more content soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.